Good evening, friends, and welcome to the True Crime Witch podcast. I'm your host, Emma, and I will take you into the world of everything murderous, mysterious, and downright macabre. Before we get into this week's episode, I just want to say a huge, massive thank you to my first 2 ever patrons. I sort of had one, I got the email, I got super excited, posted it on Twitter, and then I got the notification that someone else had signed up. So a huge thank you to Sasha from Germany, and of course a huge thank you to my fellow Manchester Storm fan, Stephen. So for just $3 a month you can subscribe to my Patreon. I'm kind of still working out on what the perks and bonuses will be. I know that there's going to be exclusive content, so perhaps 1 or 2 things a month, but you will definitely be getting things released before I release them publicly. So like this episode, you guys would get it early and then it would be released on Monday. But like I said, I'm still working on figuring out what exactly I'm gonna be including and how much I can actually do. If you choose to financially support me via Patreon or Ko-fi, then thank you. You're helping me pay for my therapy sessions, as well as helping me make this my full-time job. If you only support the podcast by listening, sharing, etc., then thank you. No matter your contribution, I cannot express my gratitude enough, and thank you for always supporting and believing in me. This is episode 11 of the True Crime Witch podcast, Cannibal Killers. The Cambridge Dictionary defines cannibalism as a person who eats human flesh or an animal that eats the flesh of its own type. According to the website Forensic Outreach, the word cannibal is derived from the indigenous Carib people of the Lesser Antilles. And for those of you who don't know, much like myself, I didn't know this, the Lesser Antilles are a group of islands in the Caribbean Sea. The countries included are, so you've got the Virgin Islands, Anguilla, St. Kitts and Nevis, Antigua, Barbuda, Montserrat, Guadeloupe, Dominica, Martinique, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Barbados, and Grenada. The word has roots in the Spanish language and is actually very similar to the word used for savage, according to Forensic Outreach. I'm not an expert in Spanish by any means. Where the word cannibalism comes from actually does speak volumes to the attitudes of colonists at the time and their thoughts on the indigenous people. So before we get into the cases of cannibal killers, let's have a look at the different types of cannibalism so that we can better understand what we're dealing with in each case. Aggression cannibalism. Motivated by the desire to express power or control over their victim, is most often rooted in the aggressor's need for power, control, and sometimes revenge. Aggression cannibalism is the form that most often follows murder, like the cases I'll be talking about later in this episode. 2. Sexual cannibalism. A lot of killers also fall into this category. Sexual cannibalism is a psychosexual disorder, with the cannibal deriving intense sexual pleasure from the fantasies and act of eating human flesh. To no surprise, this form of cannibalism is linked to acts of necrophilia, like we see with Jeffrey Dahmer. Leslie Hensel, the author of Cannibalism as a Sexual Disorder, made a quite bizarre claim. She put forth that eating human flesh can increase levels of vitamin A and amino acid, which spurs on a chemical reaction in the brain. This results in a euphoric, almost orgasmic feeling. However, there seems to be no other research that I can find to back this claim up. 3. Ritualistic cannibalism. What you will see in most of these categories is that there is a large overlap, not just in the subtypes, but in the kinds of crimes or criminals behind these acts. A lot of cannibal killers will fall into multiple different styles, so it's hard to put a label on most. Ritualistic cannibalism is most often seen amongst tribes or older civilizations. At least that's what it's heavily associated with. In the modern world, ritualistic acts of cannibalism are linked to, quote, Satanism, I know, eye roll, and the occult, whether this is through actual evidence or just media hysteria. 4. Nutritional cannibalism. According to Nicolas Clau, the Vampire of Paris, who was a cannibal killer who murdered Thierry Bissonneur in 1994, human meat tastes somewhat like steak tartare. Nutritional cannibalism is motivated by the perceived health benefits or the person's own enjoyment of consuming human flesh. Gross. 5. Survival cannibalism. I think this category sort of speaks for itself. In the law, the act of eating a deceased person for the sake of survival is often viewed as a necessity and will most often be pardoned. This is the act of eating human flesh in an emergency situation such as a plane crash or even during times of famine. In Russia, during the early 1920s and 30s, families were said to have cannibalized their own children in order to survive the brutal Soviet famine. 6. Endocannibalism. Endocannibalism is the consumption of human flesh from a person that is within your own social group, tribe, etc. Endocannibalistic behaviour stems from the belief that people can be reincarnated or that they are regenerated after death. 7. Exocannibalism. So the last group of cannibalism is exocannibalism, which is eating human flesh from a person who is outside of your group. This behaviour is mainly seen in tribes eating their enemies as a final act of triumph following a conflict. Some tribes would even go one step further. After eating their enemies, they would display their skulls as a warning to others that they are not to be messed with. We all know that eating human flesh doesn't sound like a good idea, but it can actually lead to some pretty serious health consequences as well as legal ones. Koru is a rare neurodegenerative disease that is found amongst the Fore people of Papua New Guinea. Koru is caused by the transmission of folded proteins, which then leads to neurodegeneration. The largest risk factor of Koru, or any prion disease, is coming into direct contact with an infected brain. Koru is always fatal to those infected, and around 2,700 deaths have been recorded. The word Koru comes from the Fore word Korea, which when literally translated means to shake, which makes sense since the symptoms of Koru are arm and leg pain, coordination problems, difficulty walking, headaches, difficulty swallowing, and, of course, tremors, shakes, and muscle jerks. The Fore people caught the disease due to their consumption of their dead loved ones. They believed that eating their dead would help to free their spirit and allow its passage to the afterlife. Transmission of the disease was pretty widespread, as women and children were the ones who would eat the brain, which, as we know, is the main organ involved in catching Koru. World War II is no stranger to atrocities, war crimes and other horrific acts of violence against our fellow man, and sadly it was no stranger to rumours and stories of cannibalism. A lot of the cases reported during World War II were cannibalism for necessity. The 872-day siege of Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, saw soldiers eating their dead comrades between 1941 and 1942 in order to survive. Chichi-Juma. Of course, it wasn't only the Russians, Germans, French and British who had to divulge into cannibalism during the Second World War. The Japanese were no strangers themselves to war crimes, as seen at Unit 731. The case of Chichi-Juma saw Japanese soldiers killing 5 American airmen before eating them for pleasure and as a sign of victory. James Bradley, the author of The Flyboys, A True Story of Courage, detailed how the Japanese indulged in ritualistic cannibalism of their prisoners of war. An Australian lieutenant described how he discovered cannibalised bodies, quote, "One consisting of only a head which had been scalped. I also saw just a spinal column," end quote. Now let's jump into the first case that I'd like to cover. The Krasnodar cannibals. Dmitry and Natalia Bakshiv are known in the Russian media as the Krasnodar cannibals. The couple are rumoured to be a cannibalistic couple that would put Andrei Chikatilo to shame. Dmitry was born in 1982, with Natalia being born in 1975 in Russia. Dmitry worked as a nurse in the Krasnodar Higher Military Aviation School of AK Servov pilots. However, he was dismissed due to his rampant alcoholism. Dmitry is absolutely no saint, and though he had previously been tried for robbery and car theft, by the time this case came to light, those convictions had been wiped. Following those convictions, he took up work as a repairman in the apartment block where he lived. Dmitry and Natalia began living together after Natalia had inherited the flat where the pair lived from her ex-husband. Many people who knew the couple said that they lived, quote, "an antisocial lifestyle," end quote. The couple reportedly started their reign of terror in 1999, often luring their victims in with the promise of a friendly drink or by finding them on online dating websites. They would drug their victims with Corvalol, which is a tranquilizer, before savagely attacking them. It is unknown if the couple were together in 1999 and performing these acts, or whether the photographs, which you can find over on my Instagram, belongs to either Natalia and Dmitry, or they were displaying it as an inspiration for their crime together. The only confirmed victim of the couple is Elena Vakhrusheva, I apologise, I completely butchered that, who was born in 1982. The three were drinking together in the couple's flat when an argument broke out between Natalia and Elena. The argument happened after Natalia thought that Elena was flirting with Dmitry and was getting way too close with him. Natalia ordered Dmitry to murder Elena before she joined in. Elena was then stabbed multiple times before being dismembered by the pair. They also kept some of her remains in the house while disposing of the rest. The discovery of their crimes was a complete accident, and it's highly likely that they would have continued to get away with it. Dmitry's lost phone was found by road workers who decided to have a little nosy at his phone, perhaps in the hopes of finding its owner. On the phone were pictures of Dmitry posing with human remains, and even a picture of Dmitry holding a severed human hand in his mouth. Of course, the road workers reported everything to police. The pair were immediately detained and taken to the local police station. Dmitry argued during his interrogation that he had found the remains in the bushes and simply posed with them in some sort of extreme joke, I guess. He later recanted this and confessed that he had killed the victim in question before posing with her remains. Most of what we know at this point in the case is actually speculation and rumour, since the investigation is still ongoing. Here are some of the rumours about the cannibal couple so far. It is rumoured that the couple killed and tortured their victims before making them into many different dishes, and sometimes even keeping the remains canned. It has also been reported that with these cans, Natalia gave them to the school where the pair lived and worked. Dmitry Bakshiv confessed to a murder in 2012, which is possibly the same murder as the one pictured on his phone. Natalia Bakshiv apparently confessed to being responsible for over 30 murders. Also, throughout the duration of their interrogation and questioning, Dmitry and Natalia would confess and then retract their statements, and even claim that they were forced to confess by corrupt police officers. Natalia Bakshiv tried to enter a plea of not guilty by insanity, thereby saving her from going to trial and instead being sent straight to an institution, as seems to be quite commonplace in Russia. Instead, Natalia was found sane at the time of her accused crimes, and therefore was deemed fit to stand trial in the near future. During the investigation of the flat where the Bakshis lived, there were fragments of human flesh stored in saline solution, along with other, quote, frozen meat parts. In the basement of the complex, police also found remains along with other frozen parts. The flat was filthy and in complete disarray when it was searched by police officers. Upon entering, they were hit with the unmistakable stench of death and rotting flesh. It appeared that the flat hadn't been cleaned for some time either. Vadim Buganenko, the head of the investigative department of the Russian Democratic Republic for Krasnodar Krai, told reporters that all of the remains found by police belonged to one person, possibly the remains of Elena Vakrushkeva. Apologies again, I completely killed that name. According to media reports, during the search of the apartment, police recovered 19 pieces of human skin, 7 body parts, photos of possible human meat being used in dishes, canned food made from human meat, and even a recipe book detailing how to cook humans. The investigation is still ongoing, with Russian police fighting to be able to find enough evidence to convict the pair. I assume that both of them will be held in prison until their court date in the near future. And of course, if there are any updates, I'll keep you posted. So that was the story of the cannibal couple. Now let's get into another case of cannibalism. Any fan of Rammstein will know all too well about the case that inspired the song Mein Teil. Armin Meiwes, also known as the Rothenburg Cannibal, was born in Essen, West Germany on December 1st, 1961. Armin worked as a computer repair technician who would frequent the online forum, the Cannibal Cafe, hoping to find a willing victim to slaughter and eat. Meiwes put up several advertisements on the Cannibal Cafe stating that he was looking for, quote, a well-built 18 to 30-year-old to be slaughtered and then consumed. In March of 2001, Bernd Brandes, an engineer from Berlin, answered one of Meiwes' adverts. Many other people answered the advert, but backed out of the proposal after realising that Meiwes was actually serious. The Cannibal Cafe was a forum frequented by people with a fetish for cannibalism, to discuss their fetish with like-minded people, away from the judgmental eye of the public. The pair met at Meiwes' home on March 9, 2001 in Rothenburg, Germany. Together they made a videotape showing Meiwes consuming parts of Brandes before killing him. Before his penis was cut off, Brandes consumed 20 sleeping pills along with a whole bottle of cough syrup. This was enough to slow down his respiratory system and make him quite drowsy throughout the whole process. Brandes originally wanted Meiwes to bite his penis off, but this didn't work, so Meiwes took a knife and cut his penis off that way. The pair even tried to eat it raw, but found that it was quite tough and chewy. This led Meiwes to frying the penis in salt, pepper, wine and garlic, along with some body fat from Brandes. By this time, the penis was too burnt to be eaten, so Meiwes chopped it up and fed it to his dog. Court officials commented on the video that the pair made, which has never been made public, that Brandes was probably too drowsy from blood loss to be able to consume his own penis at that point. Meiwes then ran Brandes a bath so that he could be comfortable whilst he bled out, and most likely to be able to keep the blood in one place. He then left Brandes in the bath to go and read a Star Trek book, but he made sure that he checked in on him about every 15 minutes or so. Brandes managed to get out of the bath before collapsing and falling unconscious due to the amount of blood that he had lost. Brandes drifted in and out of consciousness for a while before he ultimately collapsed again. Meiwes decided that enough was enough. He had a moment of prayer before grabbing a knife and stabbing Brandes in the throat, killing him. He then hung his body on meat hooks. Meiwes then cut Brandes into pieces whilst he was attached to the meat hook. All of this is shown in the 4-hour videotape that has never been released to the public. Over the course of the next 10 months, Meiwes ate different parts of Brandes, defrosting him from the freezer whenever his hunger for human flesh struck again. In total, Meiwes consumed around 20 kilograms, or 44 pounds, of Brandes, cooking his flesh in olive oil and garlic. Quote, "With every bite, my memory of him grew stronger," end quote, Meiwes told the courts. He also buried Brandes at school in his back garden. In December of 2002, Meiwes would make international headlines when he was arrested in his home after a college student tipped the police off about Meiwes' online activity on the Cannibal Cafe forum. It seems that Meiwes' hunger for human flesh had not been satisfied by Brandes, and that he was on the hunt for more willing victims to eat. When investigators searched his house, they found parts of Brandes and the videotape the pair had made together. During questioning, Meiwes told detectives that he had eaten Brandes with a bottle of South African red wine, used his best cutlery, and decorated his dinner table with candles for added romance. He also added that he tasted like pork. Meiwes confessed that he had always fantasized about killing and eating someone, starting with classmates from the age of 8. The desire only got stronger following the death of his mother in 1999, which proved to be a major stressor for Meiwes. It is pretty clear that if Meiwes had been given the proper intervention and treatment, that he would have been able to come to terms with his fantasies and maybe even made a recovery, whatever that would look like for a cannibal. He also talked about how he felt lonely and neglected when his father walked out on him when he was a child. He went on to describe how he had fantasized about having a blonde younger brother who he could keep forever by consuming him. Meiwes also addressed the court on the first day of his trial, saying, quote, "I always had the fantasy, and in the end, I fulfilled it," end quote. 3 years later, on January 30th, 2004, Armin Meiwes was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to just 8 years in prison. This case made Armin Meiwes and the Cannibal Cafe an international sensation. Strangely, Meiwes expressed remorse for his actions towards Brandes and even wants to write a book in order to help people who are going down the same path he did. He even has many websites dedicated to him that allow people to advertise for victims. Since his imprisonment, Meiwes has become a strict vegetarian, which is possibly linked to his strong remorse for the cannibalism of burnt Brandes. He also estimates that there are around 800 cannibals in Germany alone. In April of 2005, Meiwes was given a retrial after German prosecutors appealed his original sentence of manslaughter with 8 years in prison. They argued that he in fact should be convicted of murder because the 4-hour videotape proved that he killed for sexual gratification. Also, they argued that there was clear motive because Meiwes had videotaped the whole event. The court actually ruled in their favour as the previous trial in 2004 had neglected the importance of the videotape made by Meiwes and Brandes. This is despite the fact that the video clearly shows Brandes consenting to be eaten by Meiwes, and the fact that cannibalism is legal in Germany. During the retrial, Meiwes underwent a psychological evaluation, and it was found that he was highly likely to reoffend. It was also discovered that he still had fantasies about devouring the flesh of young people. On May 10th, 2006, Armin Meiwes was reconvicted in a court in Frankfurt, where he was sentenced to the life imprisonment for the murder of Bernd Brandes. Now let's move on to the last case I want to cover in the Cannibal Killers episode, and it's the case of Joachim George Kroll. Born on April 17th, 1933, Joachim George Kroll would come to be known as the Ruhr Hunter and Duisburg Man-Eater. Kroll was born in Hindenburg, Germany. His father was a miner, and not all that much is known about his mother. Kroll was the youngest of 8 children and was known as the sickly kid, as he would frequently wet the bed. He had no real form of education, and he struggled to get past even the 3rd grade. These issues can mostly be attributed to the fact that Kroll had an IQ of only 76, something that was determined in his adulthood by psychiatrists. An IQ of 76 is considered borderline or well below average. The qualifying score of being intellectually disabled is 70 to 75 or below. At the end of World War II, the Kroll family upped sticks and moved to North Rhine, Westphalia, Germany. The rest of Kroll's childhood seems to be unremarkable. However, this all changed when he was 22 years old in 1955. The breaking point for 22-year-old Kroll was the death of his mother, which is a common trigger that is seen amongst most serial killers. Kroll's first victim was 19-year-old Irmgard Strell, who was found raped and murdered on February 8, 1955. She had been stabbed to death before being disemboweled. Her body was found in a barn in Lugdenhausen. 16th of June, 1959. 24-year-old Chiara Frieda Tessmer was found murdered in the meadows of the Rhine. At this point, Kroll had waited 4 years to kill again, at least that we know of, a common pattern among serial killers. Sadly, Henrik Ocht was falsely accused of Tessmer's murder and was actually convicted of the crime. Ocht hung himself in prison, unable to face the misjustice and possibly facing life or death in prison for a crime that ultimately he did not commit. 26th of July, 1959. This time, it only took Kroll 40 days before he felt the urge to kill again. 16-year-old Manuela Nott was to be his 3rd victim. She was found raped and strangled in Essen City Park. Nott also had strips of flesh carved from her bum and thighs. This would be the first, but certainly not the last time that Kroll would take flesh from his victims. The exact date of his next crime is unknown, however we do know the year was 1962. 12-year-old Barbara Bruder was abducted in Burscheid. Her body, sadly, has never been found. Personally, I'm unsure as to whether Kroll was actually responsible for this crime. He seemed to always leave his victims in places where they could be found, with visible signs of mutilation and cannibalism. Unless her body is found, it's unlikely that we will be able to determine beyond reasonable doubt whether Kroll was responsible. 13-year-old Petra Gies was found raped and strangled on April 23, 1962, in Dinslaken Brickhausen. Vinzenz Kuhn was arrested and convicted for this crime. This was the second time where, possibly, an innocent man was sent down for the crime of Kroll. I also just want to take a moment to apologise for the complete butchering of all of these German names and places. It's quite difficult, I'm sorry, I'm trying. 4th of June 1962. 12-year-old Monika Tafel was murdered in Walsum. A slice of her flesh had been carved from her bum and thighs. It seems that Kroll had enjoyed eating the flesh of 16-year-old Manuela Nott, who he had killed in 1959, that he had decided to do it again. Walter Quicker was wrongly arrested for the murder of Tafel. However, after much investigation, he was let go by the police. Just 3 months later, in October of 1962, Quicker committed suicide after being harassed by neighbours who were convinced that he was in fact the real killer. Kroll's next crime didn't come until August 22nd, 1965. We aren't sure why he decided to take a 3-year hiatus. Perhaps it was due to the attention that the Walter Quicker Monica Taffel case that he decided it was best to lay low to avoid detection. Either that or Kroll just didn't feel the need or the urge to strike for a while. This crime is also different in that it is Kroll's only male victim, but I believe that this victim was just a victim of wrong place, wrong time, as he just so happened to be with his girlfriend. Herman Schmitz and his girlfriend Marion Veen were sat in the car on Lovers Lane in Duisburg-Grossbaum. Kroll sprung out of nowhere and attacked the couple. Schmitz didn't survive the attack, whilst Veen managed to escape, much to the fury of Kroll. 13th of September 1966. Ursula Rowling was found strangled in Forester Bush Park. Much like with the other cases, another man was falsely accused and brought in as a suspect. This man was Adolf Schnickel, Rowling's boyfriend. He killed himself shortly after as he couldn't bear being accused of the crime and losing his beloved. 22nd of December 1966. It seems that the Christmas cheer just had no effect on Kroll and his sick desire to kill. Just 3 days before Christmas in 1966, 61-year-old Maria Hettigen was found raped and strangled at Huxwagen. This sickening summer crime would be Kroll's second youngest confirmed victim. It seems that Kroll had no age limit and didn't care about the types of women and girls that he killed. He only cared that they were female. 5-year-old Iona Hark was found raped and drowned in a ditch in Wuppertal on July 12, 1969. 21st of May, 1970. 13-year-old Jutra Ran was walking home from a train station when she was attacked by Kroll and strangled on May 21st, 1970. Again, in another infuriating case of innocent men being accused, Peter Sehe was arrested and subsequently released. For much of the community, it didn't matter that these men had been cleared of the crime. In their eyes, it was the police who were at fault for letting a murderer walk free in their community. It was a pure witch hunt where everyone decided that they could play judge, jury, and executioner. Sadly, Sehe could not take the pressure of the community witch hunt, and he confessed to the murder of Jutra Ran in 1976. So, not only did Kroll claim victims by means of murdering them, he claimed the lives of innocent men who would have to take the fall for his crimes. Sometime in 1976, 10-year-old Karen Topefa was found raped and strangled in Voyard. There isn't much detail surrounding the murder or the circumstances. Kroll's final and youngest victim was 4-year-old Marion Ketter. Ketter had gone missing a few days previously, and police tracked down their suspect, Joachim Kroll. When they turned up at his house to question and arrest him, police were horrified to see parts of Ketter's remains simmering in a pot on Kroll's stove. Let's have a look at the victimology and the information about how Kroll liked to kill. Kroll would only like to kill under the right conditions, which might explain why he took such long breaks. For him, everything had to be perfect, so it could be an undetermined amount of time before the right opportunity presented itself. Kroll would never kill or dump bodies in the same place twice, unless it had been years since he had last used the location. Kroll showed a huge amount of insight, planning, and premeditation, and he most definitely falls into the organised serial killer category. He would take his victims by complete surprise before strangling them. He also had a handful of victims who he stabbed or shot. This could be due to circumstance and being able to attack his victims in any other way, or it could just show a complete escalation in his deviance. Once his victims were dead, Kroll would strip them fully naked before raping them. He would often masturbate over his victims multiple times, showing a clear escalation in his sexual deviance and desires. He would then move on to the mutilation of his victims. Kroll would heavily mutilate his victims, cutting and slashing away and removing their breasts, noses, etc. After that, he would cut large chunks of flesh, mainly their thighs and buttocks since women have the most fat there, to save for consumption later. He even had a sex doll that he would use after his victims became too decomposed to engage in necrophilia with. Kroll would imagine the crimes in his head whilst using the doll. The undoing for Kroll came when he kidnapped his final victim, 4-year-old Marion Ketter, on July 3rd, 1976. Police went knocking door to door when a neighbour of Kroll's told them that the apartment block's waste pipe had actually been clogged for a few hours. When the neighbour approached Kroll to ask what was going on with the pipes, all Kroll replied with was, quote, "guts," end quote. Following this alarming development, police went into Kroll's apartment to investigate, and what they found would change the lives of the officers attending that scene forever. In Kroll's apartment, they found the body of 4-year-old Marion Ketter dismembered into many pieces. Ketter's remains were found in the fridge, and, most disturbingly, one of her tiny hands was found simmering away on Kroll's stove. The pipe blockage issue was soon solved, as it was Ketter's intestines causing the issue. Kroll was arrested in his apartment and almost instantly admitted to the murder of Marion Ketter, along with 14 other murders and one attempted murder, spanning over the past 20 years starting in 1955. When he was apprehended by police, Kroll simply believed that he was going to have an operation to, quote, cure him. It was found that he did not feel regret or remorse for his killings, leading psychiatrists to diagnose him as a sexually sadistic psychopath. During his trial, Kroll told the court that he often sliced off the flesh of his victims to eat so that he could save whatever little money he had, explaining that animal meats were very expensive. Another reason he gave for killing was that he had seen pigs being slaughtered with sheer disregard from being a young boy and growing up on a farm, an image that he said had been burned into his brain for the rest of his life. He could simply not forget the violence. He was able to hide in plain sight for so long because he would travel to nearby towns to scout around for his victims. Through shooting, stabbing, and strangulation, Kroll was able to make the police believe that many different killers were responsible for his crimes. This was a huge factor in Kroll evading capture. Kroll was officially charged with 8 murders and 1 attempted murder, since his crimes dating back to the 1950s were very hard to prove. His trial began on October 4th, 1979, in Saal, Duisburg, lasting 151 days and concluded in April of 1982. It seems that this possibly could be the second longest trial, only to the Nuremberg trials of Nazi war criminals. Since Germany had long abolished the death penalty following the end of the Second World War, Kroll was sentenced to 9 consecutive life sentences. As Kroll was borderline mentally handicapped with an IQ of 76 and a diagnosed sexually sadistic psychopath, he would serve his time in a hospital for the criminally insane. On July 1st, 1991, at the age of just 58, Joachim George Kroll died of a heart attack in the Rheinbach prison. Condemned to an unmarked prison grave, the raw hunter had been snuffed out from existence. But in the eyes of his victims' families, not even the death of the most cruel and evil man could come close to justice for their loved ones. So that was episode 11, Cannibal Killers. I I want to say I hope you enjoyed it, but considering that we were on about cannibal killers, I'm not sure how much enjoyment you can get out of such a dark and horrific topic. You can always find me on social media. I'm always posting on Twitter, so if you want to catch up with me, what I'm doing, what I'm getting up to, leave me a tweet, whatever. You can just follow me on Twitter. It's just at True Crime Witch. I'm very active. I post a lot of nonsense, but sometimes there's some good true crime content in there. I'm also on Instagram. Again, that's just at True Crime Witch. I mostly post all of my pictures and sort of longer stories to there. It seems a bit of a more friendly format for posting pictures. I post cool, like, old school vintage stuff, you know, true crime photos, crime scene photos, obviously a lot of true crime memes. It's a must. I do have a Facebook page. I am getting better at updating the Facebook page, I promise. It's just working full time and then doing this on top. Some things just slip through the net. Like I said at the beginning of the episode, I am on Patreon if you're interested in supporting me financially. If you do, thank you so much. I honestly cannot say how much it means. Yesterday, to get that email through that 2 people had signed up for my Patreon was just like the most incredible thing in the world. Like, I was so happy. It completely made my day. So thank you to my patrons. You're the best. And remember, stay safe and stay spooky.